Star Wars 7x7 episode 2245. Today, a non-spoiler review of a new book that's just been released today. This is the Clone Wars book, Stories of Light and Dark. Punch it! Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod, and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy. And thank you so much for joining me for it. So, first off, thanks very much to the fine folks at Disney Lucasfilm Press who sent me a copy of the Clone Wars Stories of Light and Dark book to review and to talk about with you. And in case you're not familiar with this book, if you haven't heard anything about it leading up to its release, well, basically it's a collection of 11 short stories, and they are all based on episodes of the Clone Wars TV series. Specifically, sometimes it's one episode, sometimes it's a story arc, and all of the stories are written from a particular character's perspective. So it's basically a deeper dive into each of these particular episodes or story arcs, for example, and the characters that are chosen for this run the gamut. So you've got Cad Bane and Count Dooku and Captain Rex and Padme and, all sorts of good guys, bad guys, scoundrels in between. And some of the authors would be familiar names like Rebecca Roanhorse, who wrote Resistance Reborn, or Zoraida Cordova, who wrote A Crash of Fate, Jason Fry, who's written a couple of different novels in the Star Wars universe, Lou Anders, who wrote Pirate's Price, etc., etc. And there are also some new names as well. And I have to say, I am really impressed with the stories in Stories of Light and Dark. So, here's the thing. With some of the Star Wars books, some of them are written for adult audiences, some of them are written for young adult audiences, and some of them are written for middle grade audiences, at least, the books that we talk about here on the show. And yes, there is a logic to the notion that if you are an adult, then it is highly likely that you will find stories written for adults to be more satisfying, more complex and interesting and thought-provoking than, say, moving down to young adult, than, say, moving down to middle grade. And this book is actually, advertised, marketed as being for middle grade readers, so kids 8 to 12 years old. But very much like the Clone Wars itself, even though it was a kid's cartoon, it was very emotionally and politically complex and became more so as the series went on. And I found that even though the book is supposed to be a middle grade audience book, it really reads more like at least a young adult, and in some places like a book of adult targeted short stories. And the collection mixes up the way it presents the different stories too, which is really fun. There are some that are done third-person omniscient with the narrator, sort of sitting over the shoulder of the particular character. There are some where it's done first-person from the perspective directly of the character. You get to hear exactly what's going on in their mind, and they're telling you the story. And in some cases, it's not just past tense, but present tense. Like it's written in a very immediate fashion. Basically, as if the story is happening right then as you're reading it, as opposed to it being reported on after the fact. And the other bit of good news is that you don't have to be familiar with the Clone Wars episodes that are inspiring these stories in order to enjoy them. In fact, there are some that I did not remember, where I didn't remember the Clone Wars episodes upon which they were based. A couple of situations where, once I got into the story, I was like, oh yeah, now this is ringing a vague bell, right? But they give you, generally speaking, enough information about, the context of what was happening in the episode and the broad story arc overall, so that way you're not lost as you're following the story through the perspective of that particular character. And I'll tell you one pretty interesting fact about the 11 stories that are in this book. 3 of them are based on stories that were done by one particular writer, and it's notable for a very special reason. So before I do that, I do want to give a quick shout out to our friends at Audible and talk about the free audiobook download and free 30-day trial you get by going to sw7x7.com/audible. You've heard me talk about this on the show before. It's a pretty cool feature, and with all sorts of Star Wars content on there, dozens of books in the new canon, hundreds of books in the old canon, or the expanded universe, and thousands of books overall whatever you want, it's right there for you. So check out the free audiobook download and free 30-day trial offer at sw7x7.com/audible. And thank you so much for supporting the show. So here's the fun fact. 3 of the 11 stories are based on episodes and story arcs that were written by Katie Lucas. And all the rest were 8 different writers on 8 different episodes or sets of episodes from the Clone Wars. So Katie Lucas with 3 different storylines represented. And Katie Lucas is, of course, the daughter of George Lucas. So, we spend a lot of time talking about Dave Filoni as, an heir apparent in Star Wars storytelling, but I don't think we've talked enough about Katie Lucas in that regard. And so I think down the line, we're going to have to do that, and probably sooner rather than later. But for now, that is going to do it for the non-spoiler review of the Clone Wars Stories of Light and Dark short story collection. Really very well done. Not the end of our conversations about it, but the end of it for today. Thank you so much for joining me for it, as always, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
Star Wars 7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2020 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.